The airfield that no one feared. April 18th, 1942. Just after dawn. Eastern Honshu, Japan. A thin layer of mist clings to the rice paddies beyond the perimeter fence as the sun begins to rise. The airfield lies quiet, almost complacent. Rows of neatly parked aircraft rest wingtip to wingtip, their metal skins catching the pale morning light. Mechanics move unhurriedly between hangars. Guards smoke cigarettes, rifles slung loosely over their shoulders. This base is far from the front. Too far, everyone believes. No air raid sirens sound. No fighters scramble. There is no reason for alarm. High above the Pacific, far beyond where Japanese planners believe any enemy aircraft could reach, a single silhouette has already crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed. The men on the ground do not hear it yet. Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle grips the control yoke with steady hands. The instrument panel of the North American B-25 B. Mitchell vibrates subtly beneath his gloves. The aircraft is heavy, heavier than any Mitchell has a right to be, loaded with fuel that pushed the limits of physics and doctrine alike. The engines hum at a carefully chosen power setting, every vibration monitored, every gauge watched. You are inside the cockpit with him, smelling oil and metal, feeling the tension that no training flight could ever recreate. Below, the Japanese coastline emerges from the haze. Fishing boats dot the water. Villages still sleep. There's no anti-aircraft fire. No fighters climbing to intercept. The enemy does not know you exist. This airfield was considered safe not because of walls or guns, but because of distance. Japanese doctrine assumed that any American aircraft would have to operate from carriers. And carriers, they believed, could never come close enough. The Pacific itself was the defense. They were wrong. Doolittle glances to his right. Co-pilot Lieutenant Henry Potter meets his eyes for a brief moment. No words are spoken. There is nothing left to say. Weeks of planning, secrecy, and doubt have narrowed into this single approach vector. The aircraft descends slightly, staying below early warning sight lines, using terrain and weather as allies. This is the blind spot. The Japanese airfield commander, Colonel Matsuda Kiyoshi, reviews paperwork in his office near the control tower. The morning report is routine. No alerts, no unusual radio traffic. The war feels distant here. Tokyo lies miles away. The threat feels theoretical. The mechanic pauses. He tilts his head. The sound is wrong. It is not the high-pitched whine of a Zero engine climbing for patrol. It is deeper, heavier. Twin engines, not radial fighters. The sound grows rapidly, echoing across the flat concrete. By the time anyone looks up, it is already too late. The B-25 bursts through the low cloud cover at barely 500 feet. Its olive-drab fuselage fills the sky like something unreal, something that should not exist here. The rising sun glints off the glass nose. For a split second, men on the ground freeze, unable to process what they are seeing. An American bomber. Over Japan. Doolittle pushes the nose slightly down, lining up the first cluster of hangars. Bombardier Major Thomas White crawls forward, peering through the northern sight, though at this altitude and speed, instinct matters more than optics. He calls a release. The bombs fall. Explosions ripple across the airfield, tearing through parked aircraft, fuel drums, and maintenance sheds. Shockwaves slap the ground. Fire erupts instantly, black smoke clawing upward into the morning sky. Shrapnel rattles against the bomber's underside as the Mitchell roars overhead. Japanese soldiers scatter. Some run for cover. Others fire rifles uselessly into the air. Anti-aircraft crews scramble, hands shaking as they try to bring guns to bear on a target that was never supposed to exist. The illusion of safety collapses in seconds. Doolittle does not linger. He banks hard, engines screaming as the aircraft claws for altitude, just enough to clear the surrounding terrain. Behind him, the airfield burns. Secondary explosions blossom as fuel ignites. The sound of sirens finally begins to wail, far too late to matter. This is not an invasion. It is a message. And this single aircraft is only the beginning. As Doolittle's Mitchell races inland, other bombers follow similar paths toward targets once thought unreachable. Each crew flies alone, unsupported, knowing there is no return to a carrier deck waiting behind them. They are committed now, committed to a plan that defied every assumption of modern warfare. On the ground, Colonel Matsuda emerges from his office into chaos. He stares at the smoke, at the wreckage, at the impossible truth overhead. The war has arrived at his doorstep, carried by an aircraft that exploited a gap no one believed could be used. The enemy thought this airfield was safe. They will never think that again. The plan that broke every rule. The B-25 levels out just above the treetops, racing away from the burning airfield as tracer fire begins to stitch the sky behind it. Doolittle does not look back. He cannot afford to. Fuel is already a constant worry. Every mile flown a calculation measured in gallons and probability. The bomber vibrates as it pushes onward, deeper into enemy territory, where no American aircraft has ever flown in daylight. This moment did not begin over Japan. It began months earlier, in quiet rooms and guarded hangars thousands of miles away. January 1942. Washington, D.C. The United States is reeling. Pearl Harbor is still fresh, raw, and unresolved. Public confidence wavers. Military planners search for a way to strike back, not with numbers, but with audacity. It is Captain Francis Lowe of the Navy who first notices something unusual while watching bombers practice short takeoffs. Army bombers, land-based aircraft lifting off in distances no one expected. The idea spreads quietly, dangerously. What if a medium bomber could launch from an aircraft carrier? The idea is nearly insane. Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle is called in not because he is reckless, but because he understands the limits of aircraft better than most men alive. Test pilot, engineer, combat veteran. He listens as the plan is laid out, then asks the questions that matter. Range, payload, deck length, wind over deck, recovery. There will be no recovery. Each crew understands this from the beginning. They will launch from the carrier, strike Japan, then continue west toward China, hoping to reach friendly territory or at least bail out near it. Navigation will be crude, weather unpredictable, capture likely. Still, volunteers step forward without hesitation. Back in April 1942, inside the Mitchell, that knowledge presses down on every man aboard. Radio silence is absolute. There will be no help if something goes wrong. Navigator Lieutenant Richard Cole tracks their position using dead reckoning and brief glimpses of landmarks through breaks in the clouds. Rivers, rail lines, coastal shapes. Every correction matters. Below, the Japanese countryside blurs past. Farmers scatter as the bomber roars overhead, some diving into ditches, others standing frozen in disbelief. No warning sirens reach them in time. No fighters intercept. The defense network was designed to look outward, not inward. The blind spot is everywhere. Another airfield comes into view, smaller than the first, but equally unprepared. Parked aircraft sit in neat rows. Fuel trucks idle near hangars. Doolittle rolls the Mitchell into a shallow dive. The engines strain, propellers biting hard into the air. Again, bombs fall. This time, anti-aircraft fire answers almost immediately. Black bursts punch holes in the sky, close enough to rock the bomber. Shrapnel rattles through the fuselage. One piece tears through the wingtip, another punches through the radio compartment, missing the operator by inches. You feel the aircraft shudder, feel the fragile balance between control and catastrophe. Doolittle pulls up sharply, clearing the far end of the field by a margin that feels measured in feet. Smoke rises behind them, joining the growing column that now marks multiple strike points across eastern Japan. This is not a single intrusion. It is a pattern, and patterns force responses. Japanese command centers finally understand what is happening, but understanding does not equal readiness. Fighter units scramble too late. Radar reports contradict one another. No one agrees how many aircraft are inbound or from where. The assumption that this is an isolated incident delays a coordinated response by precious minutes. Those minutes save lives. Inside the Mitchell, The crew checks one another quickly. No serious injuries. Fuel levels lower than hoped. The bomber turns towards escape route, heading for the vast uncertainty of the East China Sea and beyond it, China. The sense of invulnerability is gone now. Fighters could appear at any moment. Weather thickens ahead, clouds stacking high, rain bands forming without warning. Navigation grows harder by the mile. Doolittle adjusts course again, trusting instinct as much as instruments. He knows that somewhere out there, other crews are making similar decisions, alone in hostile skies, carrying the same impossible burden. On the ground, fires burn unchecked. Damaged aircraft are dragged from runways. Officers shout orders into radios that crackle with confusion. For the first time since the war began, Japan has been struck at its heart, and all of it came from a direction no one thought to guard. The aircraft presses on, engines steady, fuel draining, the horizon uncertain. The attack is over. The consequences are just beginning. Into the unknown sky. The coastline fades behind the Mitchell, swallowed by haze and distance. Below, the East China Sea stretches outward, gray and restless, its surface broken by whitecaps and the occasional shadow of cloud. This is the most dangerous phase now. Not the attack, not the flak, but the long flight into uncertainty with fuel margins already razor-thin. Inside the aircraft, the mood shifts. The immediate violence is gone, replaced by a quiet tension that presses harder with every passing minute. Engines must be managed carefully. Throttles adjusted by fractions. Mixture leaned to the edge of safety. Doolittle listens to the rhythm of the propellers, alert for any change that might signal trouble. Navigator Richard Cole recalculates their position again. Wind drift is worse than predicted. Headwinds sap speed and range. Every adjustment pushes the odds slightly further from favorable. You can feel it in the cramped fuselage. No one says it aloud, but every man is doing the same math in his head. Somewhere ahead lies China. Somewhere behind, the enemy is now fully awake. Japanese fighter patrols spread outward from the coast, but coordination remains poor. Reports of American bombers launching from carriers clash with sightings far inland. Commanders struggle to reconcile the impossible with the evidence burning on their airfields. Orders are delayed. Routes are guessed rather than known. That confusion gives the Mitchell precious time. Cloud layers thicken as the aircraft presses west. Rain begins to lash the canopy, first lightly, then in heavy sheets that blur the world beyond the glass. Turbulence jolts the bomber, throwing men against harnesses and bulkheads. The wings flex alarmingly, but hold. Radio operator David Thatcher listens intently, headphones pressed tight, hoping for any signal from China. There is nothing but static. Hours pass. Fuel gauges drop, lower than any training scenario ever allowed. The reality settles in with brutal clarity. They will not reach a landing strip. Not in daylight. Not in this weather. Doolittle gathers the crew's attention. His voice is calm, measured, almost instructional. They will bail out when the time comes. Each man checks his parachute again. Survival kits are distributed. Sidearms secured. Maps folded and refold. Below, the Chinese coastline appears through breaks in the cloud, jagged and dark. Mountains rise sharply from the sea, their peaks hidden, their valleys flooded with rain. There are no lights, no markers, only blackness and storm. The engines begin to sputter. One by one, fuel tanks run dry. The bomber loses power, altitude bleeding away as the last gallons are burned. Doolittle holds the aircraft steady as long as possible, buying time, giving his men a fighting chance. The order comes. The crew moves quickly, methodically, training overriding fear. Hatches open. Wind howls through the fuselage. One by one, they disappear into the night, swallowed by rain and darkness. Doolittle and co-pilot Potter are last. At barely 1,000 feet, with the engines silent, they jump. The Mitchell, unmanned, drifts briefly, then vanishes into the mountains below. Impact comes hard. Doolittle lands in a tree, branches snapping, body slammed against wet bark before he drops to the ground. Pain flares through his ankle, sharp and immediate. He does not know yet if it is broken. Around him, the storm rages. The aircraft is gone. The crew scattered across miles of hostile territory. Japanese patrols will soon search for them. For now, there is only darkness, rain, and the knowledge that the mission succeeded. Across China, other crews experience similar fates. Crashes, bailouts, injuries. Some men are captured. Others are killed on impact. A few are sheltered by Chinese villagers who risk everything to hide them. Back in Japan, the damage assessment begins. Burned aircraft, destroyed fuel reserves, a shattered sense of security. The realization sets in that the war has changed. The airfield that was thought untouchable lies silent and scarred. And the aircraft that changed everything is already gone, its crew scattered, its impact echoing far beyond the craters it left behind. The reckoning on the ground. Morning comes slowly in the mountains of eastern China. The rain eases, leaving behind a cold mist that clings to trees and stone terraces. Doolittle wakes, stiff and aching, his ankles swollen and useless beneath him. He tests it once, bites back the pain, then forces himself upright. Staying still is not an option. Somewhere nearby, other crew members are doing the same, calling out softly, listening for answers. Every sound feels dangerous now. Peasants appear cautiously from behind stone walls and bamboo groves. Their clothes are soaked, their faces tight with fear and curiosity. They stare at the strange American uniforms, the parachutes tangled in trees, the tall man with the injured leg. For a moment, no one moves. Then one of the villagers steps forward and bows slightly. He gestures urgently toward the hills. Japanese troops will come. Everyone knows it. Despite the risk, the villagers act. Food is produced. Civilian clothes are offered. Parachutes are hidden. The Americans are split into small groups and guided along narrow paths that wind through fields and forests, away from roads and towns. Every step is a gamble, for the villagers as much as for the airmen. Japanese search parties move quickly. Trucks grind up mountain roads. Soldiers fan out, rifles ready, bayonets fixed. Orders are harsh and immediate. Anyone suspected of aiding the Americans is interrogated. Beatings follow. Executions are not uncommon. Some crews are not as fortunate. 8 American airmen are captured after their aircraft crash near the coast. They are bound, marched, and interrogated. For months, they will endure imprisonment, starvation, and torture. 3 will be executed. 1 will die of disease. The rest will carry the scars for the rest of their lives. News of the raid spreads through Japan with shock and disbelief. Newspapers downplay the damage, but the truth cannot be hidden from military leadership. Air defenses are exposed. Doctrine is questioned. Commanders who once believed distance was protection now face an enemy willing to gamble everything for a single blow. The response is swift and brutal. Japanese forces launch a massive campaign in occupied China to eliminate airfields and punish regions believed to have helped the raiders. Entire villages are burnt. Thousands of civilians are killed. The cost of that one aircraft and the others like it is paid by people who never saw the bombers, only the consequences. Meanwhile, Doolittle and his surviving crew are moved from safe house to safe house. His ankle worsens, swelling to twice its size, but he refuses to be carried unless absolutely necessary. Chinese resistance fighters guide them through terrain chosen for concealment, not comfort. Nights are spent in barns, caves, abandoned temples. Days are spent listening for engines and boots. At last, after days that blur together, they reach a friendly airstrip. American and Chinese officers greet them with disbelief and relief. Against all expectations, Doolittle and most of his men have survived. Back in the United States, the raid is announced to the public. The details are vague, deliberately so. What matters is the message. American bombers have struck Japan. The homeland is not invulnerable. Doolittle expects disgrace. The loss of every aircraft weighs heavily on him. He prepares himself for a court-martial. Instead, he is promoted and awarded the Medal of Honor. The mission that was never supposed to work has succeeded beyond its tactical impact. It has shifted momentum, confidence, and perception. It has forced Japan to divert resources, rethink strategy, and accelerate plans that will shape the rest of the war. All because one approach exploited a blind spot that no one believed mattered. And because one aircraft proved that nowhere was truly safe. The shockwaves of one impossible flight. In Tokyo, the damage is measured not only in twisted metal and scorched runways, but in meetings held behind closed doors. Senior officers sit in silence as reports are read aloud. American bombers launched from carriers. Medium aircraft. Army pilots. Every line contradicts assumptions that shaped Japan's entire defensive strategy. The psychological impact is immediate and severe. For years, the homeland was believed to be beyond reach. Now, factory workers glance skyward during shifts. Civilians listen harder for sirens. Commanders demand answers from radar units and fighter wings that never saw the enemy coming. Someone must be blamed. Systems must change. Air defenses are reorganized. Fighter units are pulled back from the front to protect the home islands. Radar coverage is expanded inward. Anti-aircraft guns multiply around cities and bases that were once lightly defended. Japan's war effort, already stretched thin, is forced to protect territory it never expected to lose control over. At the highest levels, the raid reinforces a dangerous conclusion. If American carriers can approach Japan undetected, then the carriers must be destroyed at all costs. The focus sharpens on luring the U.S. Navy into a decisive battle. Plans accelerate. Timetables compress. Within weeks, those decisions will lead directly to the Battle of Midway. Across the Pacific, the effect is just as powerful, but in the opposite direction. In the United States, news of the raid electrifies the public. Newspapers print bold headlines. Radio commentators speak with renewed confidence. After months of retreat and loss, there's proof that the enemy can be struck, that ingenuity and courage can overcome distance and disadvantage. For the men who flew the mission, the recognition is tempered by memory. Faces of those captured, crews that never made it out, Chinese civilians who paid the price in blood. Victory feels complicated, heavy with consequences. Doolittle understands this better than most. In interviews, he downplays his role, redirecting praise to his crews. Privately, he reflects on how close the mission came to failure at every stage. A change in weather, a single engine malfunction, a delayed launch. Any one of these could have turned the raid into disaster. That fragility is part of what made it work. The blind spot was not just geographic. It was psychological. Japanese planners did not believe anyone would attempt such a mission because the risks were too high, the losses too certain. That assumption shaped their defenses and left a gap wide enough for one aircraft and those that followed to pass through. Military doctrines around the world take notice. Range assumptions are questioned. Carrier aviation evolves. The line between strategic bombing and tactical surprise blurs. The idea that distance equals safety dies quietly, replaced by a new understanding of reach and resolve. Years later, veterans will speak of that morning in fragments. The smell of burning fuel, the shock on faces below, the silence over the sea. Each remembers a different detail, but all return to the same realization. They were part of something that rewrote the rules. The airfield that was thought safe became a warning, not just to Japan, but to every nation watching. As the war grinds on, far larger raids will follow. Thousands of bombers, firestorms, atomic weapons. But there will always be a difference between the first strike and those that came later. This one required faith in an idea no one could fully prove. And it began with one aircraft crossing an invisible line, carrying the weight of an entire nation's answer. The moment that changed the war's direction. Time passes, but the echo of that raid does not fade. In quiet moments years later, Doolittle will return to that approach in his mind. The low clouds, the empty sky, the certainty that once the coastline appeared, there would be no turning back. He understands now, more clearly than ever, that the mission's true power was never measured in tonnage dropped or aircraft destroyed. It was measured in belief. Before that morning, the enemy believed in distance, believed in the Pacific as an impenetrable wall, believed that calculations and doctrine were enough to keep war far from home. That belief shaped decisions, deployments, and confidence, and it was shattered in minutes by aircraft that should not have been there. For the crews, the raid becomes a dividing line in their lives. Before Japan, after Japan, some return to combat, some are reassigned, some carry injuries that never fully heal. All of them carry the knowledge that they were asked to attempt something that bordered on impossible, and that impossibility was the point. In China, the scars remain long after the Americans are gone. Burned villages are rebuilt slowly. Graves are marked quietly. The price paid by civilians is immense and often unspoken, but it is inseparable from the raid's legacy. The success of the mission is forever intertwined with sacrifice far beyond the aircrews themselves. Strategists study the operation for decades, not for its scale, but for its audacity. A single unexpected approach, a single overlooked assumption, a single aircraft profile that did not fit the model defenders were trained to expect. The lesson is clear and unsettling. Security built on certainty is fragile. The war will continue with escalating violence, with battles that dwarf this raid in size and destruction. Yet even as fleets clash and cities burn, commanders on both sides remember the morning when an American bomber appeared where none should have been able to reach. That memory shapes caution. It shapes urgency. It shapes fear. And fear alters decisions. The airfield that once felt untouchable becomes just another vulnerable point on a map. Runways are lengthened. Guns are placed. Fighters are kept on alert. But the deeper change has already occurred. The certainty is gone. Because now, whenever the sky is quiet, there is a question that cannot be dismissed. What if one aircraft gets through? That question will haunt the rest of the war.